Welcome to the Fintech Files. In this episode, we're exploring the universe of alternative data with Mark Fleming-Williams, Communications Director at Exabel and host of the Alternative Data podcast. Mark, welcome to the Fintech Files.
Thank you very much.
So it's great to have you here. And I'd like to start from the beginning by asking you to explain to us what is alternative data.
So alternative data is a word which emerged in 2015. The phenomenon probably emerged in about 2000, but for a long time it's been creeping around in the dark and within the hedge fund space, which is a place where it's very hard to get information, and actually there is the desire to keep information under wraps. Alternative data is new types of data which are used to make gains in investment markets. And alternative data only makes sense if you consider what it's an alternative to, and that is traditional data. So traditional data is all the things which investment managers and anyone trying to make money in the markets has been using for the last 100 years, 200 years, whatever, as long as there have been financial markets. So yeah, alternative data is usually big data, but it can be small data. So usually we're taking advantage of these vast quantities of data and computing power, which is now available, and also taking advantage of things like the machine learning and kind of neural networks and natural language processing and things like this, which are getting better and better in terms of computing power, in order to take this vast quantity of data, which is increasingly becoming available from all sorts of different sources, and using these techniques to extract meaning from them and correlations, which can then make money in the markets.
Understood. In the essence, there's also something very different from the traditional data, because the traditional data comes from official sources, right? It's the quarterly results from the company, it's the GDP or other information we have in the market, whereas this doesn't depend on any of those.
Completely. And that's got its pluses and its minuses. So as you say, traditional data is the stuff that the company wants you to see. They're the things that they are releasing every quarter. It's the words that are coming from the company. And so it's the things which it's them on their wearing their Sunday best, trying to present in the best possible way. Alternative data is often the idea. Alternative data can sometimes be described as the way to get inside the boardroom and actually see what the people in the boardroom are seeing. They're actually seeing the numbers under the surface. So that comes with its pros and its cons, with its advantages and challenges. The thing about traditional data is that it is wonderfully ordered. It's usually not free to get hold of, but relatively easy to get hold of. It's easy to manipulate. There's a whole industry which has been created over centuries and how to make sense of it. Alternative data often needs cleaning. It's unstructured. It can be, for example, satellite data, which is not necessarily easy to digest numbers, or it can be the data of someone might have scraped all the LinkedIn profiles and getting meaning from that. But it needs to be transformed into numbers which you can use, numbers which you can extract value from in the markets. So there are huge challenges involved with alternative data, but within that is a great advantage at the moment, because not that many people can do it, or historically not that many people have been able to do it, which means that if you have been able to do it and you've grappled with the data challenges up to now, and particularly in the early days, 2008, if you were using alternative data in the market, then no one else was to any great degree, then you could make crazy money, but the amount of money spent to do it was also a lot as well. So that's the game. But as alternative data right now is developing, and as it's getting bigger and it's becoming more mainstream, so those challenges are beginning to fall away a little bit, and it's becoming more, and there will come a time when alternative data joins the rest of data and just becomes data, and there will be a new thing which will be called alternative data, because today's alternative data will just be what everyone uses.
Yeah, I like very much this idea. It's also about the informational advantage. If it's hard to get, if it's hard to process, if you manage to make use of it, then you're one of the few. If everyone has it, it's harder to get an edge from it. And before going deeper into that, could you tell us a little bit about the type of data sources that are available? And I know there's a lot, but just a few common ones.
Yeah, sure. So the most common and the most valuable in some ways, and some of the more traditional stuff. Okay, so the earliest, actually, let's start with the earliest, it probably came from web scraping. And actually, I've had someone on my podcast who was there doing it in 2002, 2003. And he was a guy who'd just come out of grad school and realized that he could make money by scraping real estate data from Craigslist and selling it to investors in order to get an edge on real estate. So that's the original kind of use case, that you could web scrape things from the internet and make money from it, essentially. Then probably the next big advance is probably credit card transaction data, which is one of the kind of easiest to use of alternative data sources, potentially, because it is basically showing how someone's spending their money. So you can see immediately from a credit card transaction data set, for example, how Walmart's quarter is going to be. If you've got enough data from Walmart in that quarter from credit card transactions, it's very easy to see what the ingoings into Walmart are going to be. So credit card transaction data is some of the traditional popular stuff, but as a result, because it's traditional and popular, then it can be harder to find an edge in it. As you say, finding that information that other people don't have is sometimes the game. A lot of it's about creativity as well. So you can use the same data set with a bit of creativity and still come up with ideas which other people don't have. But either way, so yeah, web scraping, credit card transaction data. I've mentioned satellite data, for example, is various uses. Historically, back in the day, it was a lot about trying to get ahead of seeing how the crops looked by taking satellite photos of the crops in order to try and get ahead of what that price would be like later in the year. I've had someone on my podcast who, what they do is they it's like sonar from satellites, but it's not audio. I think it's infrared. They can ping through clouds, and they can ping the tops of oil containers all around the world, because the tops of the oil containers all have floating lids. And so by how high up that floating lid is, you can tell what the inventory of the oil is. And so you can get a better grasp of the oil price today or the oil price tomorrow than somebody who's just using the traditional sources. Those are three big ones. Really, there is a long tail in alternative data. Every man is dog. There's a lot. Let me give you another one, which is also very relevant to now. There's a lot around sentiment analysis. So taking publicly available information, such as an example was GameStop earlier this year, taking Reddit feeds and Twitter and all the others available information and analyzing it in order to understand, in the case of GameStop, trying to get a jump on what all the retail investors are actually about to invest in, what they're talking about, can give you a situation where you're prepared for the real estate investors to drive up that asset in advance of it happening, and then you can ride it upwards, as many hedge funds did, and you can not be hit by it if you're shorting that asset, which many hedge funds were hit by it. Tracking using natural language processing on publicly available social media, for example, information is a kind of hot right now use case. But yeah, as I was saying, there are a million. Alternative data is anything which isn't traditional, which means that anyone with an idea can, in a theory, kind of create alternative data. It all fits within. And so the alternative data provider ecosystem ranges from large, established, been around since 2002, to arrived a year ago, one man and his dog has just got hold of a data set and thinks it might have value in it and is trying to sell it onwards.
Yeah, the GameStop example is a great one, because indeed that was, the data was pretty much all there. I guess other things were happening, but if you could get a hold of what was happening there, and like everyone else, I visited maybe for the first time Reddit there. It was very hard to make sense of it as well, or to really understand, what's going on if you're not into it. So I guess that's a good example of where you can get the data, and sometimes where it's relevant in specific times. And the challenge is to how do I really use it to trade and do it on an institutional basis. And we touched on it, but at the moment, who are the main users of these data?
So at the moment, I've been talking about the history, I've touched on it, but the hedge funds is where it's come from. So big hedge funds, which are by nature secretive, because the idea of how they make their money is how they make their money. And so what sources of data they're using, what they're doing to the data. So there's been an awful lot of opacity around alternative data and through most of its life, which continues to some degree today, to a large degree today. But the interesting thing about COVID, about the pandemic last year, was that a lot of people increasingly saw the advantages of high frequency data in such strange circumstances. So in 2020, you couldn't really rely. So a lot of investment techniques use what is the normal case, what happened in the last 5-10 years as your base case for what to expect this year. Obviously, 2020 was crazy. It was completely different for a lot of reasons, but from an investing perspective, alternative data can arrive 4 or 5 days after the fact. So after somebody makes a credit card transaction, then you can get that data 4 days later. When you have a crazy year like last year, then that can mean that you can really quickly understand what this new circumstances looks like. So that meant that last year was a bit of a coming out party for alternative data, and increasing numbers of people started to see it. So who am I talking about? So hedge funds spreading through into the asset management space on more widely. So all of the big pension funds, mutual funds, all the big traditional asset managers who look after your pension and insurance policies, they are increasingly beginning to see that actually alternative data is a way to stay on top of the markets much closer, and they need to be aware that their competitors might be using it. So there are some things, for example, someone said to me, you can't trade Chipotle now without having access to the transaction data, because everyone else who's trading Chipotle has access to the transaction data. So it's increasingly becoming something which you need to have to be in the market. Something which is talked about a lot is the corporate side. So the corporate side, so what we've discussed so far is the hedge funds and the financial players using alternative data to make money in the markets. Corporates find it very useful for competitor analysis, to understand where you're sitting, to understand what everyone else is doing in the market. ESG is the massive thing in finance at the moment. In general, ESG is about making sure that you're not going to have perhaps an environmental accident, or that you're following best practice. If you're a corporate, I had McKinsey on my podcast earlier this year, and they advise their clients, and they're increasingly using alternative data. If you're a corporate and you have a supplier who is based in Indonesia and possibly might be running foul of local regulations, but they're not telling you, you can use alternative data to track local news in Indonesia, because because there are companies that will do that for you, who will let you know if something's coming up with one of your suppliers, which could have a huge reputational risk to you. So things like that, there's huge, and corporates is, incidentally, they don't call it alternative data on the corporate side, they call it external data. But that is a space where it's increasingly getting traction. And then governments as well is a place where we see it, because I'm actually about to have a conversation with the Office of National Statistics in the United Kingdom about this. They again, last year, creating GDP figures all the way down from there. They found that the traditional slow-moving forms of collecting data were not up to it. So in the last year particularly, the British government, and I'm sure other governments as well, have been using more sources of alternative data. The beauty being also, if you're a government, you've got access to sources of alternative data which no one else has. So they're talking about UK traffic light data, which isn't for sale on the market at all, but they can use that in a proprietary way, and potentially it'll become available on the market once it's proven. And yeah, governments increasingly, which is an exciting development for the market.
Yeah, I find the perspective really mind-blowing as you open it up for us just now, because it means that, well, traditionally we look at the data that they feed us through governments, newspapers, the media, corporations, but now it's all open. If you can source the data and if you can use it, then you can do an infinite amount of things with it, and it really shows it's just the beginning. It's also part of this open finance, open everything. But before we go back into it, how did you get into this industry, and what drive you to get in there?
I have a background of varied experiences. I began my career in finance in the City of London, where I was born. And so I was doing various things related to the markets. Then I went off and pursued my first love, which was geopolitiks, and so became a geopolitics analyst in Texas for a company called Stratfor. But I saw data coming down the line. I saw, as a geopolitics analyst, exactly as you say, I saw data just touching on literally everything, and the future was just clearly everything in data. And I didn't know anything about it. So I went off and got a master's in big data, came back to London, and came across alternative data and thought alternative data combines all of my interests. It is data, it is finance, and it's also the whole global system. It's kind of geopolitics in a way. The way we've mentioned it touches on everything. And so I created this podcast back in November last year as a way to gain entry into the sector. So it's a new sector, and I'm very much a baby in it myself, because I created this podcast to try and to get involved, which I did, and I'm now 34 episodes in, and it's been a wonderful adventure. But yeah, so that's how it was a very attractive space. And the thing about a small growing space like this is there are opportunities. If you can make yourself useful, then there are opportunities to get in and be of use. So I did.
No, very interesting. And I find as well, this is a very inspiring way to access your ideal career path, very innovative way, but
it's a very 2020.
I feel like it's a very 2021 way, but also very, just like a very rational approach about your career. For someone, who would I hire? The person, 2 great CVs, but someone is already deeply involved before asking anything to anyone and has interviewed key players in the sector. It's a no-brainer, and I think it's for younger people. It's really an inspiring approach to create what you want to achieve and start from day one.
The future belongs to the podcast hosts. You must agree with me.
Sure. Yes. I was going to say for anyone who's starting from and creating, but podcast, absolutely. And let's talk a lot about Exabel now, where you're communications director. Can you tell us how does it fit in alternative data? What's the service and product that they offer?
Absolutely. So I should have said, so this alternative data podcast was partly as a means to get myself a job, which I did with Exabel, who was one of my early guests, the company, Neil Chapman, the CEO. And so, yeah, it was mission accomplished. As you say, I am now communications director for Exabel. Exabel is a company which we are a software platform for investors to gain access to alternative data. So there's an awful lot of alternative data providers out there, and they provide data in different forms and in different, like there's over 1,000 alternative data providers in the universe. But there's also, and as we've mentioned, there's the hedge funds who have traditionally consumed it. As it's growing, then the use of alternative data and the consumption of alternative data is spreading to people who haven't used it before. And as we mentioned, there are huge challenges in alternative data in terms of actually the data crunching, the number crunching, the actually manipulating data. And a huge challenge also is using different alternative data sets together with the traditional data, bringing it together into one big picture and extracting insights from it together about the company that you're particularly interested in. Exabel is there to do that. So it's a software platform which has all the data visualization, which means that you can throw up graphs and anything in order to check out the data and compare it. It's got the latest quantitative machine learning technology in order to crunch it together, to actually run the models, to build forecasts or predictions or whatever. And it's all in this very intuitive platform. And it is so essentially it's the key for an investor who is largely the people we're talking about, the people who are coming to alternative data fairly new. They're not data guys, they're fund managers, they're money guys. And so they don't particularly know how to use data. They're not trained in manipulating data. They want to carry on being portfolio managers. What they could use Exabel for is carrying on being a portfolio manager, not having to worry about the data. They can use the Exabel platform as a means to get the insights out of all data.
Right. So if we take an example, I don't know which one you want, counting the cars outside of Tesco or anything else, and how does it work from the portfolio manager side? Does he think, oh, maybe that's a good idea, how can I leverage it? And then you do the groundwork for him? Is that a good approach?
The idea is that these various forms of data, which are already, because Exabel has alternative data already Exabel already has partnerships with alternative data providers, which means that our platform is already populated with alternative data. So a fund manager can come to the platform and they can use this existing data and compare it with the data which has already been provided by scaffolding data, by FactSet, and they can use that to build a prediction, they can use data, for example, credit card transaction data, and they can see correlations in the past. So they can see whether when XYZ happened in the past, what happened in the markets, what happened in the stock prices, and then they can play that forward, and as new data arrives, then they can make the prediction in order to then know whether to buy or sell that X company in advance of the quarterly results, or that's just the most basic form of usage. So essentially it is doing all the things you do, but it's and you do for your day job in perhaps using traditional data, but it's using alternative data, build the correlations and find the strategies from the past and then play them forwards.
Yeah, because obviously my reference is billions, and we're going to talk about a little bit how they use data. It's all about, I discovered this through the satellites and I'm going to act on it. But here, if we talk about a real life fund manager, asset manager, it would be a much more systematic approach. You have to build it into your tools, probably back test it, and then consider using it as back test it, make sure it seems to work, and then consider using it on an ongoing basis for your decision process and your investments, right?
Yeah, it's about, so the billions example, which, as you say, we're about to talk about. It's very Hollywood. It's very looking at photos. It's walking in and seeing Damian Lewis in the office and saying, we've got this boss and X and this and Y together. That means, and he's, oh my God, we got to buy. What we're talking about, I'm afraid, would not make a very good HBO program, because what we're talking about is a lot of things happening in a black box, looking at lines and the way they converge and the way they diverge. But these things are where the money actually is. So they exist. So the things that you're talking about in terms of the billions, etc., they exist, these examples. For example, there were major market moves before an acquisition in the past because somebody was looking at the movements of the private jets of the CEOs and saw that the private jet of ex-CEO had traveled to the home city of the other CEO, and they're talking, and so there's going to be a merger, and so we should buy this stock now. That kind of thing has happened, and it's been proven. A lot of these things, but that is, I would say, that's not the common case. The common case is finding some often computational edge, or also finding, it's a way of thinking about a sector, perhaps, like so back in 2000 and 2008, in the early days, you used to be thinking about how to predict how many bikes would be sold by such and such a bicycle retailer. Now you need to, because there's so much data, because the crunching capability is so much higher, as a hedge fund right now, you need to be digging that much deeper into understanding the full logistics of how a bicycle part is made. And I'm not doing it justice, but it's a much more complex and a much more complex challenge than, I'm afraid, the event-driven stuff of billions. I'm not sure if that's answered your question.
Yes. And to break it down further, so if we try to get billions versus reality, so at first in billions, it would be a very micro play. We look at one company and we look at what does that mean for them? So for example, we've seen the jets or something like that. In practice, you mentioned it would be more realistically, it's a sector play rather than this company or this company.
Actually, it's not. So it can be. I would say it's usually a company play. So there's different kinds. There is a systematic fund which will be covering an entire indices, perhaps, and they are looking for bits. They're looking for small wins that they can make often in either direction, and they only need to be right, 55% of the time or 54% of the time or something, and then they can make the good money. So there's a lot of those in the market. What we were talking about earlier is the fundamental guys, and they will often be focused on a company, and sometimes, depending on the investor, sometimes their focus is on 10 or 15 companies which they know like the back of their hand. So somebody might know, they have been watching these 15 companies and they know the CEO's background and down to the nth degree in the traditional data. What the alternative data can give people is, for example, you may think that this company looks good, but what LinkedIn data might tell you is that a lot of people have been leaving recently, and actually that they've been going to the competitor. You can use these things for the soft inferences as well. That is possible. Or similarly, you can, okay, say you're a private equity firm and you're thinking of buying a company, but you don't know what company you want to buy. A sign that the company is really headed on the right track might be that they're doing an awful lot of hiring in a specific high-tech sector, and that so there are a lot of jobs right now around that specific area, or they've just hired all the best people. One thing was that so Amazon is the best in logistics, and so somebody wanted to know where all the Amazon logistics people have gone after Amazon, because that will be the second best. That's the future. And so you can use the hiring data to actually think, okay, so that other company, which is where all the Amazon logistics guys have gone, that's the one we should be looking at more closely. It's not, so there are lots of these. So there is the soft things. There is the things where you are actually doing detective work and you are trying to analyze the market. What I'm trying to get away from is the kind of the event driven, which gets all the headlines. This plus this equals this, and so we need to move to make a killing in the market. That is, I'd say, that's a small percentage of the alternative data world. The more is the trying to manage an ongoing portfolio and see the pluses and see the benefits, see the negatives, and let it inform your overall process on a kind of day-to-day level, rather than trying to spot the massive payouts. And there will be people out there, but they're just not the majority.
Yeah, and it complements all the other information and the knowledge that you've built about this company over the years.
Exactly.
It's not all, yeah. So I saw the data, I saw the satellite data. And also, let's look at it in practice. So I don't know if we take this looking at this episode where they look at the trucks. So let's say there's information about the trucks or the cars at a parking lot or something like that. How would they get it in practice? And assuming, so how would a company like Exabel could provide information like this to an investor?
So Exabel is
a spreadsheet, or yeah.
So Exabel is a platform, it's an interface, and it's columns of numbers, but with the ability to throw up graphs and visualize the data in various ways. But it will be the numbers essentially, and it will be, so for example, you'll get your transaction numbers and you'll get your FactSet, your scaffolding data numbers, and so but it will be the interaction between those datas, and then the visualization and the predictions, I'm afraid will be numbers as well. So again, it won't be a visual treat. It'll be a visual treat for the glorious interface which we have built in terms of the wonderfully intuitive interface, but it won't be a visual treat in terms of zooming in on satellite images of Chinese mountains. It's functionality, I'm afraid, over HBO. But it is, if you do enough with it, then you can buy yourself the TV with the proceeds and then watch the stuff on Billions and enjoy it that way.
How much processing do you have to do in order to get there?
It's a growing ecosystem of alternative data, which is growing out there. And so there are various service providers doing various things. Where we fit in is not data cleaning. The data tends to actually arrive to us clean, because we will be working often in partnership with data partners with whom we have agreements, but also with companies which will clean the data. So we aren't data cleaners. They exist. Where we sit is at the front end of this process, where the data is ready. You need to extract insights from it, and you don't know Python. You can't manipulate data in the way that you want to. So you need a really good kind of terminal kind of interface with which you can play with the data. So there are a lot of challenges with alternative data, and we are completely cognizant of them and aware of them. But all of those, the data cleaning will happen before it gets to us, and we can definitely advise on how that can happen. But yeah.
Sure, it's to understand the layers. So there's the source of the data, which is the website, the satellite, something like that. Then it gets cleaned. Then it gets processed and in a way that's easy to visualize and analyze. And then there's the decision-making process, where it's the most added value, and that's what clients can do.
Completely. There are various ways. Somebody might have found the source of the data, so they've come across the source. For example, an alternative data provider might have bought app information from an app company, and so getting all of that. So they've got the source. They've got they've got this data. Then they've got a choice. they can either try and enrich it themselves in terms of manipulating it, in terms of cleaning it, in terms of doing what's called entity mapping, which is where you're mapping the data to a specific ticker or company, which is a very long and difficult job, or they can outsource that to someone else, or they can try and sell it to a hedge fund. And at the moment, some of the bigger hedge funds will do that themselves because they see that as part of their edge. So they'll buy it dirty and clean it themselves. So there are various, and then so you've got that will often be some of the smaller alternative data providers. Some of the bigger ones will do a lot of these things themselves. We sit in between, so there is a multitude out there, but where we sit is for an alternative data user who wants to gain insights from alternative data and doesn't necessarily have the whole data science team needed or doesn't necessarily want the whole data science team needed in order to actually be manipulating the data to extract insights from it. That's where we fit. We make that easy. So we've got the platform where you can just log in and do it intuitively.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mark, for this masterclass in alternative data. I really appreciate your time. Do you want to tell us where we can find you and about the podcast as well?
Absolutely. The podcast is the Alternative Data Podcast. It's on all the traditional podcast channels, so Apple, etc. I am Mark Fleming-Williams. Mark FW is my Twitter handle.
We will put all the links in the description of the episode to make it really easy for everyone. And for now, I just want to say really thank you very much and best of luck. We're excited to see what new developments are happening at Exabel and in the space of alternative data.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, George. It's been a pleasure.